Greetings from Boston. Roger Federer has fallen to the 29-year-old Australian John Millman. This has got to be probably the biggest upset of the tournament, but on the other hand, Simona Halep did fall in this tournament, in the first round, in fact. You'll have to excuse me, it's a bit late here in Boston, but I did watch the whole match and I wanted to share some thoughts with respect to this match for those of you who are up, for those of you who are interested. Again, Federer falls in a massive upset to John Millman. The final score, John Millman prevails 3-6, 7-5, 7-6, 7-6. Folks, this was a pretty sad day for the Fed fans. Federer came out and he looked fairly good in the opening set without question. And in fact, in the second game, Federer broke Millman at love and looked to be really playing the whole court. Nothing seemed too strange at this point in the match. Again, Federer took this first set 6-3 and displayed some classic Federer tennis along the way. There were a couple of double faults. He did appear to be coming into the net a lot. He was not getting many of his first serves, and he started a trend that lasted throughout the whole match of following his second serve in with a volley, a serve and volley, and he did this very, very often. Well, thanks for your question. I saw it. We're going to get to the ultimate question. What happened to Roger? I want to get to that, but he did look fairly good in the first set, but he was a little too aggressive, it seemed. He was playing a little too forward. Now, this is coming from someone who has said that part of the beauty of Federer's game is his forward momentum. Well, I couldn't help but feel as I watched this first set that he was just being too forward. He was being too aggressive, coming up to the net too often. He started another trend of executing these drop shots, and by the end of the match, he had, I think, attempted about 50 drop shots during the course of the match. Listen, folks, to save you the suspense, this was a bizarre showing for Roger Federer without question. I'm still trying to figure this out, and so I welcome you all to make some comments. It's, again, hard exactly to understand what happened. Federer did take that first set. He looked strong. He looked fairly solid coming into the second set. But again, a little too forward. He seemed like he was having a little too I want to say he was having a little too much fun, or he was trying to entertain himself a lot. I'm not sure what he was doing, but it was some bizarre play. It was a little too much net play. It was a little too forward of a momentum in his. It was forced. It was a forced momentum in his game, which was a little off-putting for those of us who know Roger. It wasn't natural. That was the problem. Well, in the second game of the second set, we had some warning signs, some real red flags at this point. This was a very long game. It went for about 15 minutes, and there were a number of break points. There were a number of deuces, and Federer ultimately held, but it was a sort of canary in the coal mine. Something was wrong. Millman came back and held pretty comfortably, and something, again, was just off. Well, Federer did manage to break Millman in the fourth game, but then Millman broke right back. And as it happened, they were back on serve, but in the ninth game with Federer serving at 6, it would have been 5-6. Millman did break and took the second set. In terms of explaining just what happened here, and then, of course, the match was basically over. Listen, I could kind of summarize this. The other key point, which I thought was going to be potentially a turning point, was in the third set when Federer appeared to be turning around, but he just couldn't sustain what he was trying to do. The first serve started coming in a little more because, they were just lacking. They were scarce as deviled eggs after a church picnic, the first serves in the first set and the second set. Well, he started to bring them up a bit more in the third and fourth sets, folks, but he was just unable to fend off Millman, who was making Federer hit about 5 more shots than pretty much any other player on the tour would make Federer hit in a given point. He was just retrieving everything. Federer could not end points. This, of course, added sort of insult to injury on Federer's apparent strategy because he was already coming out trying to end points very early. But when he couldn't even do that, and when Millman continued to return shots that were, again, for most of the other players on the tour, pretty much irretrievable, he continued to get them back. And Federer, again, just didn't have answers. He was playing in a bit of a bizarre fashion today, folks. And so we have to examine the ultimate question, which is what was wrong with him? What on earth happened to Federer? Because clearly, as Millman said at the end, and as anybody who knows Federer and anybody who knows anything about tennis would agree, he was just not quite himself. In terms of the aggregate numbers in the match, he was barely getting 50% of his first serves in. When he was getting his first serves in, he did have a good aggregate percentage, but his win percentage on his second serve was fairly poor, 47%. Federer hit 76 unforced errors in this match, folks. It was a very sad showing. 65 winners, which was impressive, but again, offset by all the unforced errors. He was both players were actually 3 of 11 in terms of the breakpoint conversion rate, but Federer served a number of double faults. He also, like I said, I guess it wasn't 50 drop shots, but it was around 40 drop shots that he attempted to execute, sometimes successfully, but other times not so successfully. He came to the net 81 times. Now, this is what I'm trying to communicate when I say he was playing too aggressively and it was out of character. It was strange. It was bizarre. 81 times he came to the net. And I think there was about 50 wins in there, so he was more than 50% in terms of his net wins. But there was so much net play. It was fun to watch, but it was bizarre, and it didn't seem to have a rhyme or reason. So it was a bit hard to figure out where Roger was. Listen, one piece of this is that he seemed fatigued. He seemed a bit, to be honest, out of shape. He had, I think, a bit of kind of, I don't know, a spare tire, for lack of a better term, going on in his belly. Maybe he was bloated. I'm not sure. I noted a couple of episodes ago I wasn't a big fan of his outfit. Well, his outfit tended to bring out the kind of bloated, and there was a bit of an extra layer there. You watch a player like Novak Djokovic, and he's just so thin. And I think that's sort of the standard. I mean, you do have Nadal, who's very muscular, but Federer has always been very thin. I think he just seemed a bit misshapen tonight in a way, but he, again, had a terrible first serve percentage. He pretty much, in a couple of the games, there were that really long game in the second set, the one that went almost 15 minutes. I mean, he was something like 2 for 24 on his first serves during the course of that game. Yes, they played about 24 points in that game. It was a very long game, and Federer was just time after time missing those first serves. And then time after time, he was coming in and serving and volleying behind his second serve, which was effective sometimes, but it was just odd. He didn't seem to be in a responsive mode on the court. He didn't seem to be responding to the particular circumstances that he was facing. He seemed to be executing some preordained strategy, which was, okay, I'm going to drop shot him a lot. I'm going to bring him up from the baseline toward the net and try to sting him at the net. I'm going to serve and volley behind my second. And again, the strategy was come up to the net. I mean, I felt like I was watching Misha Zverev, and that's sort of an inside tennis joke for those of you who know a few of these players. Misha Zverev is Alexander Zverev's brother, and he is a serve and volleyer, and he just comes into the net at every available opportunity. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's very hard to watch a serve and volleyer or someone who executes that kind of play because it's very high-risk play. It's sort of a numbers game, and you have to be willing to stomach losing a lot of points. Well, I felt like I was watching Misha Zverev on the court, but it was Roger Federer. So it didn't seem to make sense. He was not in character today. And when he was trying to bring Millman up to the net, he was doing so with these backspun sort of slices in a way, but sort of drop shots / slices that were landing in the forecourt. They weren't, I call them drop shots. Some of them didn't succeed as drop shots at all. They were pulling Millman up to the net, but often they were poorly executed such that Millman had plenty of time to tee off. And one of the things I was asking myself is, why isn't Roger just trusting his forehand or his backhand or just an ordinary ground stroke, a penetrating ground stroke as an approach shot, or like a chip and charge maybe, to hit a sort of forceful approach shot and then come in behind that? Well, it just does not appear to be what he was doing. There was one game where he did like 4 or 5 drop shots in a row. It was clearly a preordained strategy. So to my mind, and this is sort of the nugget on Federer in tonight's match, is that he had a fixed strategy, and that's what produced the loss. He didn't seem to be able to break out of a fixed strategy and start responding to the other player. Well, Millman was playing very well. We talked about some of the aggregate numbers in the tournament that Millman was posting. He had coming into this match the highest second serve win percentage of anyone in the tournament. John Millman did. He also had one of the highest numbers of break points won in the tournament. So there were some signals coming into this, and I did mention those the other night in my live broadcast, that Millman seemed to be really on fire, and this guy can run. He was just running down everything. And Roger, to talk a little bit about his psychological state, one conspicuous piece of this match with respect to Federer and his sort of attitude is that he was not getting himself psyched up. He wasn't saying, come on, when he made good shots. He seemed to be just a little too withdrawn, not totally committed to the match and to the moment. He wasn't in the moment. He was in some other strategy that he had come up with prior to the match. And this was his death knell today. It was an inflexible strategy that he couldn't break out of. Perhaps there was some fatigue that contributed to the problems. But I do think that based on the way he was playing, he just had a strategy. And I've talked about before that Federer, at least when he is playing well, is anti-strategic. He doesn't come in with fixed strategies. He's got a number of different approaches that he can work in as needed. He's very responsive. Hyper-responsive is a term that I've used in past episodes, but tonight there was no responsiveness in a way. He was operating on an inflexible sort of strategy of drop shots and approaches and serve and volleys behind his second serve. It was clear as day. And there was no mistake about it. And so Millman was able to kind of catch on to this, and Federer didn't really change. He kept doing. It was like he was on a suicide mission tonight. I mean, there was some brilliance in there, don't get me wrong, but it was like he was on this kamikaze mission to execute drop shot after drop shot, or whether you call them drop shots or not, I'm not sure. I mean, they were into the forecourt. They were sliced most of the time, and again, they were basically drop shots intended to bring Millman forward. But there was only a few of them that actually worked, and most of them, as soon as Millman caught on, he's not a dumb guy. He's smart, and he was being very responsive on the court tonight. He was feeling Federer out and understanding what Federer was doing, but let me tell you, it was not hard to understand what Roger's strategy was. It was not hard. Why wasn't Roger simply hitting, a devastating topspin forehand? Why didn't he just run around some of these shots and hit some of his dependable forehands and come in behind those rather than these strange, and to be honest, it was kind of a mixed bag with these drop shots tonight. There was so much net play. Listen, I love serve and volleying. I love, in fact, watching Misha Zverev. Well, I don't love watching Misha Zverev that much. It is not for the faint-hearted, but when he's playing well, it's gorgeous to watch. And the same with Roger. It's gorgeous to watch, but he was operating in some other sphere. He didn't get into the moment tonight. I think that if I had to distill the essence of it, he was just somewhere else. He was just somewhere else. He seemed emotionally in control. And by the way, that somewhere else, I mean, it's not unrelated. It wasn't unrelated to the match. I think that where he was in a strategy of attempting these moves. These kind of new moves. They're not new moves. They're moves he's attempted before, but they were just predominating his game in a way that suggested to me that he was caught up in a strategy. Federer was caught up in a strategy. It was sort of an ill-conceived strategy, but he was like a broken record. And it was just happening over and over again. And the saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, or something to that effect. And that's kind of what Federer was doing tonight. I mean, he was kind of driving himself insane. If we accept that definition of insanity, he just kept doing the same thing over and over. Well, listen, John Millman deserves a lot of credit. I don't mean to say that this, is not a reason that each match has an outcome that's based in part on what the winning player did right and in part on what the losing player did wrong. And the outcome of this match is partly based on what Millman did right, without question. He was such an athlete. I mean, so athletic in a way reminiscent of Novak Djokovic, running down every ball, requiring Federer to play virtually perfect points in order to win the points, retrieving balls he had no business retrieving. Millman is a true contender. I had a question from one of the viewers as to whether Millman could take it all. Well, we'll find out soon enough. He's going to face Novak Djokovic. I want to talk a little bit about Djokovic, but I'm not quite done with Federer yet. We still have to kind of work through this, and you'll have to excuse me. It's quite late here in Boston. For those of you signing on, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. This U.S. Open is going to be fantastic and exciting and produce some historic tennis. Even without Roger Federer, I know there are a lot of Fed fans out there, but it will be a great tournament without him. We'll miss him, but again, he seemed to be a broken record tonight, and if that's the kind of game he was going to bring to Djokovic, or I'm not sure he would have brought that kind of game to Djokovic, but if he was going to come out and start experimenting with Djokovic, or I don't know, just hitting as many unforced errors as he did tonight. I mean, listen, 76 unforced errors, folks. It's just inexcusable. There were 65 winners, which is a lot. I mean, so that really tells the story about the kind of game that Federer was playing. He was attempting to attack, but ultimately he could not weather the storm of John Millman. And Millman has a very penetrating double-handed backhand that Novak Djokovic is going to have to watch out for and be very careful about. It's an accelerating shot that he can take cross-court or down the line. It's very effective. Millman also has a certain confidence, a certain cockiness even in his personality that, you know, it could take him a long way in this game. I mean, my question is, where did he come from? You know, and this just happens in tennis. You know, people come in and, you know, from out of left field. I remember Marco Cecchinato at the French Open, but you do wonder, I mean, how do they come in out of nowhere and then they just battle through these really long matches, and sometimes, you know, they're beating top players, they're beating and slaying the legends. It does make you wonder, I mean, what made a difference for John Millman? I mean, just last week he was losing in the first round to Taro Daniel at Winston-Salem. It is a real question to me. I don't impute anything sinister about it. But I do wonder. But back to Federer just for a moment. Listen, there was some speculation that possibly an injury was bothering Federer. Yes, David, it was a huge achievement. And for you Aussies, I'm glad to hear that you are proud of your countryman Millman. He did a tremendous job tonight, and again, by discussing Roger, I don't mean to at all undermine or, you know, take anything away from Millman, because he brought a great game. It was an attacking game at points. He was serving quite well. I mean, obviously better than Federer, but he delivered at key moments. He delivered the clutch tennis. But as I said before, I mean, that double-handed backhand was a very, very difficult shot for Roger to handle. But it's not an excuse. We're not making excuses for Roger, because there is no excuse. A loss is a loss. We're trying to figure out, as an analytical matter, to the extent that folks are interested, what exactly went wrong. Well, my thesis that I'm developing is that he was ensnared in a strategy. And the strategy was clear as day. Go back and watch the match. It was about hitting drop shots and bringing Millman up to the net and then trying to ensnare him at the net somehow, which didn't work often. It was about serving and volleying behind second serves. It was about approaching the net at every possible opportunity. And if I didn't already say it, it was about drop shot after drop shot after drop shot after drop shot. It was a bit mechanical in a way, though Federer did display a lot of brilliance in this match. Don't get me wrong. There were some real flashes of brilliance for Federer, but ultimately he was ensnared in a strategy. Physically speaking, and by ensnared in a strategy, the background is that I think Federer usually doesn't come out onto the court with any real strategies at all. At least in terms of one inflexible strategy. I think he has a number of different things to work with, but most of all, he stays responsive. He stays responsive and changes and adjusts. Okay? So that's exactly what he was not doing tonight. He wasn't responding. It didn't seem like he was sensitive to the circumstances around him and to the particular player on the other side of the court. So he didn't really adjust his game much. The first serves did start coming later in the match, but it was more of the same in terms of the kind of overly aggressive approach that he took. And by overly aggressive, I guess that term is not entirely appropriate because Millman was the aggressor in so many situations, and Roger, again, just couldn't weather these very penetrating and precise ground strokes coming off of both wings from Millman. And once again, congratulations to you Aussies, and I know a number of you are probably up and watching this. It's 2 a.m. here in Boston, and I'm a bit tired. We stayed up late watching the match. I'm glad that for you folks for whom there's it's daytime, you can kind of watch this. I'm going to try to plow through this. Forgive me if I'm a little groggy, but in terms of other things that we can decipher in Federer, I do think fitness-wise he looked problematic. He was just a little plump. Maybe it was bloated. I'm not sure. But if you go back and you watch that match, you will see a sort of you will see some extra padding on the Federer midriff that was pretty conspicuous to me. And that's just something I noticed. But one of the major things that I noticed, and that was pretty noticeable for anybody that knows Federer, is that he just wasn't getting psyched about this match. He wasn't committed to it in the way that I've seen him be committed to such matches. And in those circumstances, he'll do the fist pumps. He'll get himself going. He'll say, "Come on." And you can tell that he's getting into it. Well, Federer he was emotionally in control, which was good to see. I support that. I don't think he should be irascible on the court or have, even the mini tantrums that he's been having of late. I don't think it's a good thing for his game. So I was very glad to see that he was keeping it even keeled on the one hand, but again, he went too far in the wrong direction. I mean, so to summarize, I've said that, Federer should play a more forward angled game. In other words, incorporate the forward momentum into his point construction. But my response to tonight's match is that actually he did that too much. And That was part of the problem, and it was just overkill. It was just overkill. And there were a number of things he was just doing too much. He was going too far with elements of his game that could have been good if they had been distributed a little more with a little more discretion, as it were. But I'm getting some comments. Yes, it was very hot. I think that's got to be part of the problem. There was a lot of sweating going on. I think you're welcome for doing the live stream. I didn't get all of that message, but you're welcome for doing the live stream. I wanted to come on and just talk about this a bit. I'm still gathering my thoughts, to be honest, and I'm quite tired because it is after 2 a.m. here in Boston. But the comment to the effect that it was very hot is a correct one, and that might have been bothering Federer to some degree. And I guess I don't know what else to say. At one point, Mirka was trying to kind of pep him up, actually yelling from the audience, trying to get Federer committed to this match because she could sense it too. Obviously, anybody that knows him could sense it. And there did seem to be a moment there in the fourth set, I believe it was, where it seemed that maybe Federer could turn this around, but more of the same was on the way for Federer, and he just couldn't turn it around. There were too many double faults. There were too many errors. But in terms of trying to kind of psychoanalyze this, I'm not sure I can. Listen, at the beginning of this tournament, folks, I said that Roger Federer was not the favorite to win. I also said that Federer could probably get to the quarterfinal, notwithstanding the fact that Nick Kyrgios did stand in his way. No one could have predicted that John Millman would ultimately and effectively stand in Federer's way and not let Federer through. It just was not a predictable result. But as I said before, there were some signs. Millman was posting some aggregate numbers on second serve win percentage, on break points achieved, break points won, that did suggest that Millman would be a force to be reckoned with. And I had a couple of comments from people that were watching the stream, I think yesterday and the day, well, it must have been yesterday when we were talking about the Millman match. And there was a comment to the effect that Millman will actually be the real test for Federer. Now, and I understood with that, the effect of the significance of that comment. I must admit, I underestimated the threat of Millman. And as I said before, each tennis match, the outcome of each tennis match relates both to what the winning player did right and to what the losing player did wrong. John Millman, for you Aussies in the audience, and for you Aussies who are proud of this 29-year-old who seems to have come out of the woodwork, come out of nowhere, out of left field, and slayed Roger Federer. Even when Roger Federer is playing in a kind of bizarre way, I mean, it's still very, very commendable, an incredible achievement for Millman. I like his style. I like the fact that he stayed positive in this match. He knew he could win this. He could taste this match. All he needed was one set, in fact. When he won the second set, he could taste the match, and he started closing in on it. In a way, the match was over at that point. There were enough signs from Federer, particularly after that second game, whereas in the second set, whereas I said Federer held, but there were a number of break points. It was a lot of pressure. It was a 15-minute service game. It was telling, and it was hard to put it all together as I sat there and watched the match. But I'm beginning to kind of understand it. I will have much more to say about this, obviously, though I don't want to dwell too much. It's not totally unexpected. For you Federer fans, I do empathize. It's hard to watch your man fall. But listen, champions rise and fall. That's the reality. He's 37 years old. He had a killer comeback. And he was able to do things that essentially no one thought he could ever do at 36 and 37 years old. He's set more records. And he is still going to be around. But we knew coming into this, or by we, I'm saying the people who have been watching this live stream and this channel, and the people who otherwise apply a clear-headed analysis to tennis, even the Fed heads knew that Federer's chances coming into this tournament were not high, that he could have suffered an upset at any time. I had a relatively optimistic set of comments about Federer after he was able to take Kyrgios out in 3 sets. Even though he was very nervous and edgy in the first set, he finished strong, and it seemed like he was finding form. It seemed like he was basically ascending, as I put it. He was finding his rhythm, as Roger likes to say. But Robert Ferguson says, sorry, but Federer played like a man who is powerful. Well, no excuse. I'm getting flashes of these comments. Hi, Robert. It's great to have you. Federer was not having a good day, but it's not an excuse. I'm not sure. Let me take that back. I'm not sure he was having a bad day. Again, the nugget on the Federer match in terms of what happened to Federer is that he came in with a strategy, folks, and he doesn't usually come in with strategies, at least not inflexible strategies. He came in with a game plan that was set, sort of in stone, because he didn't waver from it, did he? He just played what he had preordained, what would be his strategy. And rather than responding, rather than feeling out the player in front of him. Now, apparently he and Millman have practiced fairly often, so they do know each other, and they kind of have felt each other out a bit on the court. But Roger wasn't being responsive. He wasn't that hyper-responsive killer cat that we know. He wasn't adjusting, and the hyper-responsive mode includes basically continual adjustment over the course of a match. Continual adjustment. Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate that a lot. At 2 a.m. in the morning, it's 2:15, I suppose, but there were a lot of mishits, too many drop shots. I'm getting some comments that are saying all the right things, echoing a few things that I've said, but please keep the comments coming. For those of you just tuning in, remember to subscribe to the channel, and when you subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can get notification of the live streams. We'll be going daily all throughout the U.S. Open because we love tennis and we love the contenders that are remaining. We want to understand what's happening to Federer, but in a way, there's not too much to understand. It's sort of a simple. It's a simple proposition, folks. It is that champions rise and fall. They can't last forever. I know it doesn't seem like it sometimes, but he is human. On some level, on some level, it seemed like he kind of threw this match. It wasn't conscious, but on some level, by coming out with this, again, sort of inflexible strategy, it was robotic. I mean, it was beautiful. I don't mean robotic in terms of being, not aesthetically pleasing to watch. Of course, he was beautiful to watch. He's always beautiful to watch. But it was robotic. It was a strategy that he got ensnared in. And it was like a broken record, I think, for a lot of the match. Now, maybe that's not being so fair to Federer. He did pull out a number of other shots. There was some variety in his game. But generally, he was going for very risky shots. I mean, coming in and serving and volleying so much behind his second serve. It worked quite a bit, but it was a risky move that he didn't need to make. But again, 76 unforced errors. It's really uncharacteristic. I'm not sure about this, but that might be a record in a 4-set Federer match. Maybe he's made more errors in a 5-set match. I'm not sure. But in a 4-set match, that might be the most unforced errors he's ever hit, at least since his breakthrough in 2003. But what can I say? 81 times Federer came to the net. 81 times. Now that might be a record too. It was just, I just don't know what to make of this. 81 approaches to the net in a 4-set match. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like his head was screwed on straight tonight, folks. And I just don't know why. I don't know why I'm feeling like he almost threw this match. I mean, he almost lost it. Just like, you know what? I want to go home. I want to go home. Maybe that's what he was feeling. But after the Kyrgios match, why would he be feeling that way? I think there was a lot of reasons to be happy and optimistic about Federer going into this 4th round and quarterfinal, because the Kyrgios match was such a success. Why did he come into this match with some new strategy? He didn't need a new strategy necessarily. I mean, it was a different player, but he could have come in and played basically how he did against Kyrgios, and he probably would have won the match. But instead, there was all this bizarre behavior, almost from another era. You know, he was almost playing like it was like in the late 60s. He was like, I'm going to do a Rod Laver here or something. But we're not living in the age of Rod Laver anymore. And John Millman reminded Roger Federer of why so few players come to the net. And when they do, they don't come very often these days. There's a reason why net play, there's a reason why the serve and volley has gone out of fashion, folks. And it has to do with topspin. It has to do with the racket technology and the string technology. And it has to do with the increasing physicality of the game. And Roger got a taste of that in the form of Millman's tremendous two-handed backhand, which he was just pummeling Federer with. Federer had nothing to match the Millman two-hander down the line and cross-court. Federer had nothing to really answer the Millman two-hander. You know, nothing as fast, nothing as penetrating as what Millman was doing with his two-handed backhand. But Millman was also hitting some fantastic forehands. Again, for you Aussies listening in, congratulations to you. I hope you're proud and feeling great about your countrymen. For those of you who are also Federer fans, in Australia, you must have something of a conflict of interest here, but I didn't know much about Millman. I want to learn more about him. And I'm just going to have to kind of look into this character. I'm going to have to do it in preparation for kind of doing an analysis, a preview of this Djokovic match, which I will talk more about tomorrow. Of course, all of us were expecting that it would be Federer versus Djokovic, and that was another comment that was getting made during the course of the Federer match, which was, is Federer thinking about the Djokovic match? And maybe that was part of the problem. What I said before is that he wasn't in the moment. He was in a strategy, and some abstract strategy, but he wasn't in the moment. And maybe part of the reason he wasn't in the moment is because he was also thinking about the Djokovic match. But in so doing, he was kind of getting ahead of himself. He first had to beat this lad on the other side of the court, John Millman, and Millman was not going away very easily. I mean, he just would not let go of Federer. Federer had to hit, I would say, 2 more shots in every point, even points that he was totally dictating. He had to hit at least 1 or 2 more shots than he would have to against virtually any other player on tour, because Millman was just retrieving everything. Well, he probably would have had to hit those shots with Djokovic too, but part of the problem, again, was that he was approaching so often and putting himself in something of a vulnerable position sometimes. Sometimes it wasn't the strongest approaches that he was coming in behind. So there again, he wasn't responding to the situation. He didn't seem to be thinking tonight. I don't know what happened to the thinking Federer. The thinking Federer was not in the building. It was more of the automaton Federer, right? The robotic Federer. Now, granted, as I said, and I got a comment about this, I mean, it was great to see some of that in all-court play. He looked like he was playing in 1969 in the age of Rod Laver. I've got one comment. John Millman is the GOAT. Oh, now we're having fun. Well, this is definitely fun. Here in Boston, it's 2:30. I know it's a little later in the day for you. Maybe you guys are like cracking a beer and having a good time. Well, again, congratulations to those of you who are fans of John Millman. Once again, I didn't know a lot about him coming into this. I'm going to learn more. And for those of you who want to talk more about him, I definitely would like to learn more and talk more about him. I think that Djokovic does have his work cut out for him, but I must say that Djokovic is looking splendid, folks. He is looking to be very unstoppable. At this point, after the match with Sosa, I'll have to just watch Nadal and team a bit more. Provided Nadal gets through team, I'll just have to feel out Nadal a little more. But I do agree, to the extent that John McEnroe has kind of changed his favorite, I do agree that Djokovic is starting to look a little more like the favorite based on the form he's exhibiting in these last few matches. Against Gasquet, he just slayed. Gasquet was just befuddled by Djokovic, and there was this. Djokovic has kind of 2 angles. I mean, there's a part of Djokovic that sometimes comes out that's very attacking, very much an aggressive player, and we saw a little of that in the first set against Gasquet, and then we saw a little of that in the whole match against Sosa, in a way. But against Sosa, Djokovic was pretty much in the same comparable form as to what we saw against Gasquet. I mean, I think one strategy for Sosa, and Sosa is a pretty aggressive attacking player, but he was trying to dictate against Djokovic, but it's so hard to have the forward momentum against Djokovic because he's always driving players back with that suffocating depth, often into the corners. But there was a point in this match against Sosa in the final set, in fact, when Djokovic broke Sosa at 3-4 with Sosa serving. Well, it was a break at love. Djokovic won 4 straight points in this service game of Sosa's and broke Sosa. And each of those points was won by a winner. Now, people don't associate Djokovic necessarily with a lot of winners because he doesn't hit a lot of winners, but he can. It was mind-blowing to see him break Sosa at love with winners, purely winners. And 3 of them were the same shot, a backhand down the line. And the same line, backhand down the same line. It was just over and over. 3 times Sosa couldn't figure it out. So Djokovic then wrapped up the match, and by serving it out, I think he held to 5, and he held his head strong there held head high. Excuse me. I'm very tired, folks, so you'll have to just excuse me as I'm trying to basically produce words and tell you what I had tried to plan on telling you. The other match that I wanted to mention was Delpo versus Coric, where basically Coric was not able to understand prior to this match, and Delpo won this very convincingly, was not able to get it through his head prior to this match that you must avoid the Delpo forehand. You can't hit to the Delpo forehand. You could hit to his body. You could make him run around things, but you certainly don't want to hit out in front of his forehand side so he can start galloping and then hit one of those very flat, but usually irretrievable forehands. I mean, I think it's the best forehand in the game. I mean, you watch that match with Coric. Coric had no response to these forehands, and yet he still couldn't understand. At the very least, he needed to just pummel the Delpo backhand, but he could not get a good enough piece of the shots to kind of dictate play in that way. So this was a real failure for Coric. Delpo just steamrolled over poor Borna Coric. At one point, Coric was having a real hard time because he was sweating so much, and there was so much sweat all over the court. This produced some controversy. The question is, whether the umpire should have wiped up all of Coric's sweat. It was Coric's sweat. So the question is, is the tournament responsible for wiping it all up? The other thing, of course, that Coric could have done, the sweat was coming off his hat. The other thing that Coric could have done was change his shirt and his hat, basically at every possible opportunity, every changeover, which I don't think he was doing. So he was just dripping. He probably could have prevented it. But the other mistake he made was going to the umpire about this rather than just doing it himself or getting one of the ball people to do it. So Delpo, or it might have been Djokovic even, was asking one of the ball boys to do the same thing in one of the recent matches. So I think it was unnecessary to go upstairs, as it were, to the umpire to get that done. But in any case, Coric ended up just getting clobbered in that match, in part because apparently he was playing a little cautious. He didn't want to slip, at least there in the first set. That was part of the problem. Nishikori was able to come through Kohlschreiber without much incident at all. I think a lot of that has to do with Nishikori's ability to neutralize the Kohlschreiber serve with fairly deep blocked returns often, but then often some real directed and precise returns from Nishikori. He's serving strongly. He looks very good, and he's going on to face, it will be Cilic. And that, let's see, I think that just about, there was Phan versus Cilic. Phan really was not able to bring much of a game to this match to Cilic, which was disappointing. I had some expectations about Phan, but he had a real lackluster performance today. Credit to Cilic, who struggled quite a bit against the other Australian upstart, De Minaur, who took the first couple of sets off Cilic the other night. That was a suspenseful match, in fact, but Cilic did come back and was able to close that out. But those are the quarterfinals, therefore, that we have lined up. It's going to be Nadal versus Thiem. And that's rivalry that we've talked about on a number of different occasions, particularly back in the clay season. And I think Nadal does have the advantage coming into this, but the form that Thiem displayed in the match against Anderson, which he won in straight sets, does suggest some promise for Thiem going into this match against Nadal. If he can bring that form, and based on the history of Thiem, he will not bring that form. Not that high of a level. But if he were to bring that to the court tomorrow to Nadal, then I do think he stands a very good chance of upsetting Nadal. Now, wouldn't that be something? Federer and Nadal out by the quarterfinals. That would be something. That would be very interesting. We'll have to kind of assess that if it happens. The other quarterfinal, Delpo versus Isner. And listen, Delpo, again, if Isner is like Borna Coric and hits to Delpo's forehand, he's going to get punished big time. But I think Isner is capable of giving Delpo a very hard time, taking Delpo to the breakers and letting it shake out in the breakers. And you know what? In the end, you don't really want to be in a tiebreaker with John Isner. He's very good at playing in the tiebreakers. He plays more tiebreakers than just about anybody in the tour. And, you know, if it goes to 5 sets, well, I'm not sure if there's anybody on the tour that wants to go 5 sets with John Isner. Again, he's kind of the master of the 5-set match in a way, or at least he's got the experience. He's got more experience than many, many folks, probably more experience than Delpo in that regard. Then there'll be Cilic versus Nishikori, and that should be quite an interesting match. I'll have a lot more to say about that in the live stream coming up in the next couple of days prior to the match. And then finally, Djokovic versus Millman. Pretty similar players, to be honest. So we'll have to see whether John Millman can continue this run he's been having, which is unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. Of course, tonight's match was the match of John Millman's life, the match of a lifetime. We'll have to see whether he ever has that kind of match again, can ever perform at this level again. It might just be a flash in the pan with him, folks. And for you Aussies in the audience, and if you're Millman fans, I hope it's not. But these things do happen. You do have flash in the pans. Marco Cecchinato is another individual that it has been referred to recently. In fact, I talked about him earlier in this stream, suggesting that, again, he was a person that, again, seemed to kind of have a breakthrough, but hasn't been able to really follow it up. So we'll see what happens with John Millman. He's a great athlete. He can really, I'm going to try to take this comment. What do you think, Aaron? Roger, I'm missing these comments. Let me see if I can maybe come up here and find, for some reason, the computer, and I need to get the comments coming up, but they're coming up over here on my camera, essentially, and I'm not seeing all of them. But I have seen a few of them. Ask the question again if you really want me to answer it, and I'll just kind of get right in there so I can read the question. Again, I apologize. Now it's 2:30. I'm going to have to be signing off here pretty quick, but I'm quite tired here in Boston and still trying to figure all of this out. But for those of you just tuning in, we've been talking about the Federer loss, the devastating Federer loss. Will Roger Federer win another major? And if that's the question, it's a very legitimate question. Thank you for phrasing it simply and in a concise sentence so I could read it. I think it has to be becoming more unlikely at this point, folks. I mean, let's just look at the recent history. I mean, it kind of all goes back to Indian Wells, if you ask me. The match points against Delpo, but the inability to deliver. Then you do have the disappointing loss at Halle in the final to Coric. And then, of course, you have Wimbledon, which was just totally inconceivable that someone like Kevin Anderson could come back against Federer 2 sets down. Totally inconceivable that Federer could let that happen, and yet he did. Then you have Cincinnati, where there were some flashes of brilliance, but in the end, it was a very lackluster performance against Djokovic in the final. So now here, it seemed that he was on an upward trajectory at the U.S. Open in his first 3 matches, to be honest. It seemed, from Nishioka to Paire to Kyrgios seemed to be suggesting an upward trajectory, seemed to be suggesting that he was going to do well in this tournament. But the fact of the matter is that tonight he came out and played a very bizarre match of tennis. And so the answer to your specific question is I think it's becoming less and less likely that he will win another major. It could happen. There could be one more that he's able to squeeze out. I think it's possible. I think it's becoming improbable. If it's another one, I think it's going to be one more. I don't think it's going to be 2 more. I think he might be able to squeeze out one more, but it's not probable at this point. That's my assessment. And I am a Roger Federer fan in a way. I love what the man has done for the game. I love his style of play, and he's a big inspiration to me. So it's hard for me to kind of admit, but I think that we have to face the evidence, folks. We have to confront the reality in front of us. And you're right, Robert, if he could bring down the unforced errors, he might be able to win another major. Well, again, I mean, unforced errors were the problem tonight, but they haven't been the problem on all the occasions where he has struggled. Generally, when you lose a match, the unforced errors are referred to, but tonight was different. Tonight was just odd. He came in and he started playing. He was like a bull in a china closet, in a way. He just started thrashing around and approaching an ungodly number of times during the course of the match. Again, 81 times he found himself at the net. 81 times. It's abnormal. It's unusual. It's strange. It's conspicuous. Of course, 76 unforced errors. That's strange. That's conspicuous too. 65 winners. It all suggests this strategy he had coming in, and which he would not depart from and not change, not adjust, not tailor to the circumstances, it seemed like he had a strategy. He was going to show off a little bit tonight, apparently. And, that a particular player with a particular set of ground strokes and a particular style was on the other side of the court was apparently of not much of a moment for Federer. It wasn't very important for Federer. What was more important that he come out and display this really, I think it was interesting tennis. I think it was sometimes very pleasant and aesthetically pleasing to watch, but ultimately it reminded me of a broken record, and it smacked of just bizarreness. It was just bizarre. It was bizarre. Why was he doing that? Why was he approaching with the drop shots rather than just relying on Old Faithful, a nice forehand? It's unclear. Why was he missing so many first serves? Well, somebody brought up the point that it could have been his back, and that would definitely impact the serve, but he seemed to be doing well with the second serves. There were too many double faults. But in terms of the underlying problem, I can't imagine what it is. I can't imagine what drove the man to implement this strategy, and I can't imagine that Ivan Lubicic would have signed off on it. I can't imagine that Mirka would have signed off on it. I have to imagine that he came up with this plan in private, didn't really share it with anybody, didn't really ventilate the issue with his advisors, And I could be wrong about that, but that's just what I believe, because, again, I can't imagine that Ivan Lubicic would have said, "Oh, yeah, that's a great idea, Roger. Come up to the net 81 times in this match. Hit whatever it was, 40 drop shots. Go ahead and hit 40 or 50 drop shots tonight, Roger, and come up to the net 81 times. Serve and volley on your second serve all night." I can't imagine that Lubicic would have said, "Good idea. That's a good strategy." No, it doesn't seem right, folks. And, it's hard. I don't believe it's true, but it's like, I believe there's a sense in which he may have just thrown this match. He didn't want to win it. He wanted to go home, which is strange. I mean, maybe he didn't want to face Djokovic. Now, I had stated, when a number of viewers had said, or at least one viewer had stated, and I think they were kind of joking around one time in a live stream from last week, they said that Roger is scared of Novak Djokovic and does not want to face Novak Djokovic. And I thought that was an interesting comment, and my response was no. My response was, I think he needs to face Djokovic, and Fed fans should want him to face Djokovic and want him to redeem against Djokovic. But I also said that Federer himself is not scared of Djokovic. He wants a piece of Djokovic. That's what I said. But then he came out for the Kyrgios match. Now I'm kind of putting it all together as I sit here, and he was really nervous before the Kyrgios match. I don't know if any of you guys got to see the little small pre-match interview. And he, particularly in contrast to Nick Kyrgios, who seemed to just kind of be hanging out, seemed to be pretty calm, cool, and collected, Roger seemed to be very nervy. He seemed to be kind of a nervous Nelly. And during the course of the first set, he demonstrated a lot of that nervous Nelly. He wasn't playing very well. He did ultimately win the set, and then once things broke, he found his form and was playing really well against Kyrgios. But so on the one hand, you had nerves against Kyrgios. Now, if Roger's having nerves against Kyrgios, well, he was definitely probably having nerves against a potential Djokovic matchup. That's probably true. So maybe there were some nerves, but I can't imagine that the nerves would have brought Roger to the conclusion that he should deliberately avoid facing Djokovic in the quarterfinal. But the idea that Djokovic was on his mind is a plausible one, because Djokovic had won. He had beaten Sosa. He had really bullied and beaten up on Sosa in a way. Part of it was that classic defense Djokovic, but there was another part of Djokovic on the court who was really aggressive. And so that was pretty impressive to watch as well. So Federer very well may have been thinking about that match, and that might have been bringing him out of the moment. He wasn't in the moment tonight, folks. He wasn't fully committed 100% in the match in terms of responding to everything that was happening in the match. Something was off. He came in with a strategy, and he became ensnared in his own strategy to his very significant detriment. He couldn't adjust and respond and tailor his play. He just kept doing the same things over and over and over again like a broken record. Now I sound like a broken record talking about it. So I don't want to kind of hammer too hard on that. But in terms of what could be wrong, in terms of an underlying problem, it's just unclear. Fitness-wise, he didn't look great. And I've mentioned this a couple of times. Go back and look at the highlights if you didn't see the match. There was a bit of a spare tire growing with Federer. There's a bit of a protrusion when you see him from the side, and I don't know whether he was feeling bloated or whatever, but he's not lean and mean. Wasn't looking particularly lean and mean tonight. But most of all, he just did not look committed. There were no fist pumps. Now, eventually, a couple of fist pumps did come in the fourth set when it was too late. And he couldn't sustain that. But for the first three sets of the match, which included some great points by Federer, some great wins, some great service holds, he didn't seem like he was psyched up about the match. He again, no fist pumps, no come-ons, no real connection to his box, which was a real contrast with John Millman, who was connecting very, very solidly, very intimately with his box, talking even to the people in his box. He has a young coach that was very, intent on the match and watching everything, and they were really keeping a close communication. He had a lot of support. Now, Mirka did make some comments for Federer and kind of was yelling for him, trying to pep him up there in the fourth set, and that seemed to work for a moment, but in general, you didn't have that kind of box support for Federer. Well, one thing that might have been occurring is that his box might have been watching him and saying, what is going on? Like, what are you doing? We didn't know about this. Why 81 times to the net? I mean, why are you approaching 81 times? I mean, why all these drop shots? Why the serve and volley behind the second serve, as a matter of course? Basically, it became very predictable what Federer was going to do next. So maybe it was hard for his box to support him because they were like, what is he doing? Why didn't we talk about this? Why didn't he tell me? Maybe Ljubicic was saying, but as I said before, I cannot imagine that Ivan Ljubicic would have signed off on this strategy that Federer apparently had coming into this match. Unless Federer sat down with Ivan Ljubicic and said, I don't want to play in the U.S. Open anymore. I want to go home. I don't know. I don't want to face Novak Djokovic. I want to go home. So I'm just going to have fun out there tonight. And maybe that, as I'm thinking about it, maybe it does come back to that, having fun. Federer hasn't been having a lot of fun on the court recently. I said a couple of episodes ago that one of the qualities in Federer that his early coaches mentioned quite a lot is that he always had to be entertained in a way. He always needed to be surprised with new things. So the coaches couldn't, do these routine drills over and over and over again with Federer. He needed to be challenged and surprised, and he needed to be having fun to perform his best. But in order to have fun, Federer, again, needs variety, challenge, newness, exciting new things on the court, right? Well, maybe that's part of what happened tonight. I mean, maybe he understood, as we all of us who have been observing him have been noticing, that he doesn't seem to be having fun anymore, right, on the court. And that's been happening for a couple of months. But maybe he just decided, I want to have fun. I like serving and volleying. I like coming to the net. I love hitting drop shots. I haven't been doing it all the time because I've been trying to stay disciplined and I've been doing what my coaches are telling me to do or something. But I'm not having fun anymore doing that, and I want to have fun. So I'm going to serve and volley behind my second serve because I'm Roger Federer. And I want to come out there and do my thing and have fun and be challenged and entertain. I want to, so maybe he was trying to inspire himself. He's just kind of trying to create a little fun for himself, play the kind of tennis that he dreams that he could play in a way. I mean, in a sense, what I said before is that he was kind of playing a style of tennis right out of like 1969. Which is great. I love the style that Rod Laver developed and whatnot, and it was sort of similar to that. But we're not in 1969 anymore, and so it shouldn't have been a big surprise that sort of strategy, that kind of blast from the past in terms of style, would not work against a person like Millman, who is Djokovic-like in his style of play, to be honest. I was saying before, he brings an amazing two-handed backhand, and he was hitting accelerating backhands, both cross-court and down the line, all over the place. And Roger didn't have a match for that. He didn't have a penetrating forehand or a backhand tonight. He didn't have the kind of firepower that Millman had. He was trying to do it with touch and touch alone, I think, but I think touch will only go so far, and you have to be sensitive and responsive to the particular circumstances and the particular player that you're playing. Federer seemed to have his own plan in mind. I think in the ordinary course, when Roger Federer comes out and wins Grand Slams, I don't think he comes out with fixed strategies. He comes out ready to respond, ready to adjust, ready to play the game and the style of game that needs to be played in order to beat the player on the other side of the court. Everything is tailored to that. But, well, thanks for joining us, Robert. I think you said you had to go. Thank you so much for your support. Stick around. We are still, Federer's out, but Tennis Talk Daily is in. We're still doing live streams all week. We're still covering every angle of this U.S. Open. And we're still going to be having a lot of fun because we have some fantastic players left standing in the tournament. We have the best players in the tournament left standing. That's the definition in a way. And so it's going to be, I think, absolutely an historic tournament, but also a very exciting one. And we could see some more upsets. There's been quite a few upsets. Remember, over on the women's side, the number 1 seed was upset in the first round, Simona Halep. Now we have Federer, the number 2 seed, sent packing by John Millman. For those of you in Australia and who are fans and supporters of John Millman, I think that you have a lot to be happy about, and congratulations to you. he played a fantastic match of tennis, and he deserves a lot of credit. I believe Roger Federer will give him a lot of credit ultimately, too. Millman is a contender, and you never know. Stranger things have happened than Millman actually beating Novak Djokovic in the quarterfinal. It could happen. But in response to Robert, who asked me who my pick was, I'm sticking. I'm sort of conservative. I like to do the pick, and I like to stick to it until I get some real contravening evidence. And Federer's loss to Millman actually doesn't change my calculus about this tournament at all in terms of a favorite, because he was never my favorite to win this tournament. I picked Nadal at the beginning last week to defend his title, and I'm sticking to that proposition and to that prediction. Although I do admit that based on what Djokovic has been producing over the last couple of matches, Djokovic is starting to kind of creep up on Nadal's hind end in terms of being a prediction to win this thing. I think Djokovic is displaying the form that could ultimately produce another Grand Slam trophy for him this year at this tournament. So my prediction is, by all appearances, a Djokovic-Nadal final, and I believe at this point Nadal will edge Djokovic at the U.S. Open this year in the final and defend his title. But my one caveat is that I want to watch Nadal in the match tomorrow with Thiem. That's going to be telling. I think for the Nadal fans, what you're going to want to be looking for is for Nadal to put Thiem away in straight sets, just like he has pretty much always done in the big ticket matters, when, at the real significant moments in their head-to-head. So and particularly in the best of five context. So that's what we're looking for. But if Thiem gives Nadal some trouble, there have been some suggestions that Nadal has a knee issue. Now that's, if Nadal, then all bets are off. I'm assuming Nadal does not have a major injury. He did have a small preparation on his knee the other day, but I'm assuming that he's injury-free. So the long and short of it is that if Nadal is injury-free, he will win the U.S. Open. He will edge Djokovic. It'll be a street fight. It'll be a tough match. A rematch from Wimbledon, but I believe that this time Nadal will come out the victor. That's my sort of scientific prediction on this, but I might modify that. I might do what Roger Federer should have been doing today, which is responding to the situation before him, adjusting his thinking to what's going on. And if what I see in this match against Thiem is a suggestion of a major injury or a possible injury from Nadal that's going to inhibit him, then, all bets are off. But if Nadal if there's no injury, but Nadal is really struggling with Thiem, and there's just something uncharacteristic in that match about Nadal that sort of confirms what some people believe is some kind of problem with Nadal at the tournament, then I might change it. But as it stands, it's on course, I think, for a Nadal-Djokovic final. Now, the other problem that Nadal could have is Delpo. And having watched these recent Delpo matches, particularly Delpo versus Coric, I think Delpo is a real contender here. Nadal, of course, knows how to play Delpo. Coric was just all confused and just didn't know what to do, apparently sweating so much he couldn't even play on the court. There was so much sweat all over it. He was slipping all over the place, but he was just playing right into basically the best forehand on the tour. As far as I can tell, that's what he was doing. I mean, he couldn't get it through his thick head. Excuse me, Borna. I don't mean to suggest you have a thick head. I'm just saying it seems like a pretty obvious element of your approach against Del Potro that you have to, whenever possible, avoid that big booming flat forehand of his, which is pretty much the best forehand on the tour. And once he gets a piece of it, it's irretrievable. It's irretrievable, and he just kept pummeling Coric with that. So Delpo could be a problem for Nadal if Nadal is not firing on all cylinders. Like I said, if there's an injury issue, well, Delpo might put away Nadal if Thiem doesn't before Nadal gets to Delpo. So Nadal ultimately, I've called his draw pretty smooth, but there's some competition here, and Basilashvili offered some competition. Certainly Khachanov offered some competition. Thiem, based on the form that he displayed against Anderson, is going to be a real contender. But like I said, based on the history, Thiem probably won't maintain that level. So he'll probably slip off a little bit, in other words. So we'll just have to see how it all plays out. Each day is a new day, as I received a comment that said the other day. That's true. You can't really, you can't extrapolate with absolute certainty from a given day to the next, to be honest, with these players. But there are trends. They do get a feeling for these courts at particular tournaments, and they do start to find form. And so there's a bit of extrapolation that we can do. And I think, by all appearances, Nadal, and I think in the Basilashvili match, I think he demonstrated that, he can deliver. I called him the delivery man. I said the delivery man was back in the building in the match against Basilashvili. And I think that's true. I stand by that proposition, notwithstanding the fact that Nadal did drop the third set. Well, he has his work cut out for him in Thiem. And listen, things could change. The final could be Djokovic Delpo, for all I know. One of the things I love about this sport, folks, is that it is unpredictable, to be quite honest. It's anything can happen, and that's why I love this sort of never-ending story of professional tennis. It's just a new story with new characters coming onto the scene at all times. John Millman, I mean, it's John Millman, if you're out there, it's fantastic to have you. Welcome. I just love to have these new players, to watch these new players stage these upsets and surprise us all. So that's been so entertaining, and I think that the surprises potentially are not quite over. So for those of you tuning in, thanks for your support. Thanks for your viewership. We've done a lot of comments on the Federer match, and please let me know your thoughts on it. I would love to know them. Leave comments. I will read comments that are left on posts after the live stream is over with. I'll go back and read them tomorrow. So would love to hear your views on all this. To the Fed fans, sleep easy. Champions rise and fall, and there's just no way around that. He's done so much for this sport. Thank you also. I'm getting a few thank yous from people. Thank you right back at you. But Federer is a god, folks, and he doesn't need to play one more tennis match to prove that he's a god. He already is a god. He is the GOAT. It's possible that on the numbers, Nadal will catch him, and that's just how it happens. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all your comments, and remember, subscribe, come hither, hang around, comment, and I'm really looking forward again to sharing the rest of this tournament with you guys. We're going to be doing live streams daily from Tennis Talk Daily, and I promise you I will be more articulate than I was tonight, because usually I'm not doing the live streams at 3 in the morning, which is now what it is, 3 in the morning. We've been on for about an hour and a half, and I've enjoyed this. It's gotten a little better for me as it's proceeded, because when I first went on, I was tired and confused, having just watched the match, but this has helped me as well. So I really do appreciate it, and I will look forward to the next broadcast, which will be coming tomorrow. I have to get some sleep. It's been wonderful. I want to thank Roger Federer for the great tennis that he has given us all. He's such a big inspiration in my life. I don't know what was happening with him today. I don't know why he chose to come out and put on that particular show. He was putting on a show of some kind, and I'm not sure why he was doing it, but I loved the tennis he played tonight, most of it, and I love what he's done for the game. He is a true great, and what can I say? We love him. We love you, Roger. We don't know what's going on with you, but we still want to see you play. We don't care if you're winning Grand Slams anymore. At least I don't. I don't care. I want Roger to have fun on the court. On the other hand, I don't want him to come out and be sort of too much, too internal. I think he was too concerned with his own interior life rather than with the stimuli that surrounded him on the court today. And so that was part of the problem today. But Roger, you did a great job in the tournament, and we look forward to seeing you again. I look forward also to seeing all of you guys. I feel like I'm kind of running this on and on, so I'm going to say goodbye now. Sleep well if you're going to sleep. If not, have a great night or have a great day, whatever the case may be. But tune in, subscribe, and I will be back at you tomorrow. Bye-bye.